Hello, everyone. Thanks so much for joining the call tonight. This is Jessica Dudley, Director of Chicago African Americans in Philanthropy. I am so pleased to have you joining us tonight for this conversation, which will share an update on the 3 of the COVID-19 responses. So pleased to be joined by our speakers who will be giving us these updates. In case you've not had the opportunity to join us before, CAPE is a membership organization dedicated to advancing dialogue and creating the space for African Americans to advance in the social sector. Throughout the month of May, we will be having calls on issue areas related to COVID-19 response. We've had some great conversations about what's happening in justice reform and in education. Very excited tonight to be hearing about the response funds. And if you're available tomorrow morning, we'll be having a call talking about the statewide impact for African Americans at 8 o'clock tomorrow morning. And you can visit our website, caaip.org, to learn more about that call as well. Really excited to have that call co-sponsored by the Grand Victoria Foundation, the Pritzker Family Foundation, and the Woods Fund of Chicago. So I hope that in addition to joining us tonight, you will also consider joining that call tomorrow. And then later this month, we'll be talking about the current state of workforce development with leaders from Skills for Chicagoland's Future. For tonight, so happy to be joined by Sharon, Jeff, and Anna to join this conversation. I will just start with a brief introduction and framing, and then have them each share an update about the funds that they're representing. We'll get to hear from them each, and then we'll open it up to a brief Q&A. Just pausing to get a few more people into the call. But thank you again for joining us. While our speakers are making their presentations, we'd appreciate if folks stayed on mute just to minimize any background noise and distractions during the call. I will be monitoring the chat throughout the call, so please feel free to add your questions to the chat, and I will get those answered when we move over to our Q&A. A reminder that this call is being recorded, and so if you prefer not to have your face pop up on our recording, also happy to have you stay off of video, but otherwise it's always great to see faces and for the speakers to know that there's folks out there listening to the call. And if you're having any technical problems while we're on the call tonight, please feel free to send me a private message and I will do what I can to get those problems resolved. So a big welcome to our speakers tonight who are joining us to talk about the Illinois COVID-19 Response Fund, the Arts for Illinois Relief Fund, and the Chicago COVID-19 Response Fund. I want to turn it over to them to provide an overview of their funds and an update on what's happening with their funds. And Sharon, happy to have you lead us off and give us some context about what's happening statewide.
Sure. It's great to be with all of you today. I will just dive right in. So I am here representing the Illinois COVID-19 Response Fund. That fund was stood up about two months ago, actually. Oops, 1 second, guys. It's an effort that's chaired by Penny Pritzker. So what it is, it really is a true response fund. It's really meant to address urgent basic needs that are of families and individuals that are directly resulting from or either exacerbated by COVID-19. I'm on the steering committee of the fund, and I also co-chair the grant making working group for the fund. So far, the fund has raised $30.5 million. Much of that was raised really in the first weeks of the announcement of the fund. I will just kind of add, I've been in philanthropy for a while now, so about maybe 15 years. And I think this effort really is a first of its kind in that what it's doing is organizing philanthropy for a statewide purpose. I've not ever seen that. Maybe some of you guys on the call have. And so it's a really unique and really interesting thing to be a part of. So far, about $10.5 million has been dispersed through 2 rounds. Round 3 grantees and amounts will be announced next week. Within the first 2 rounds of granting, 800 organizations have received funds, but that also includes community foundations and United Ways, which we granted down to local organizations in different regions in the state. Actually, those groups that receive funding, thanks in large part to those community foundations and United Ways, have covered all of the state's 102 counties, believe it or not. So that's pretty incredible. But that's a lot of spread also for $10 million. So we're continuing to figure out the best ways to think about that in the future. And then lastly, and I imagine we'll talk about this some more in some of our discussion, is that we've tried to work to incorporate equity principles in the work. So rounds 3 and 4 will focus on those counties and populations that are most burdened by COVID-19. And these are the conversations that we've been having that really do focus on what we hear about all the time. You know, African Americans being really highly carrying the disproportionate burden of the impact of COVID, Latinx communities, undocumented folks. So we're getting into the meat of talking about like, what does it mean to really look more at the disproportionate impact in these future rounds. So I'll stop there.
Thank you for that, Sharon. Great update. We're going to have Sharon update next, and I know you have some slides, so everyone just give us a moment to make sure that we're able to get those up. Anna, let me know if you're having any problems getting those to come up. Perfect, we can see those.
Hi, everybody. I was thinking when we were scheduling this meeting, I don't know if the end of the day was a good idea, but I'm going to do my best. So thanks so much for inviting me. I'm delighted to be here to talk a bit about the Chicago Fund. So just as Sharon mentioned, we set up this fund in mid-March, so we're 8 weeks in. And I just shared this PowerPoint presentation to the group of funders on Wednesday. So this might be some repeat information. And I'd much rather this be a conversation and hear from all of you. Similar to what Sharon said, the Chicago Fund is set up in a lot of the same way as the Illinois Fund. We have a steering committee that's chaired by Sean Garrett from United Way and Helene Gale from the Trust. And that is our governing body. They're the ones who hold the strategy and also make the key decisions for the fund. The grant making working group is chaired by Kimberly Gunther at United Way and myself. And we are preparing the grant recommendations that go to the steering committee. Just given that we had engaged so many stakeholders and donors, we also recognize the value of having a roundtable just to bring groups together to talk about the evolving priorities and also share early learnings and opportunities, given that there were so many things that were just shifting and new information was being provided on a regular basis. So this is our dashboard that we have, and we update it on I think every 2 weeks. So as we mentioned, we've raised over $30 million. And a few things about the funds, just as Sharon mentioned about the trends that we're seeing. Early on, we had foundations and philanthropy kind of step up to set up the fund. As the weeks have gone by, we have found that corporate partners have come in, and that includes all of the sports teams and a lot of the I would say corporations that have a state presence, but also, national presence. We're really proud that very quickly, just given that this is a rapid response fund, we've allocated, it's actually 18.5. There's been questions, there's been some discrepancies because we've had DEP had selected Chicago as one of their the cities that would benefit from their relief fund, and they were working with United Ways across the country, and they are focused squarely, mostly on direct cash assistance to Black communities across the region. So we've already, there's already over $13 million in communities. So we're really delighted that we've been able to be expedient and make sure that communities have what they need to respond to the crisis. I also thought the distribution of the amount of grants and the type of grants is important too. You'll see that you know, we have grants ranging from $325 to $25,000, and you'll see that the largest number is that $25,000 size, and that's really to support some of the organizations that are in community, that are Black and Latinx led communities, having resources to really respond to their community's needs. I'm happy to just continue to go on through the presentation and then take questions. So this is just a summary of the grant making activities thus far, and I'll just kind of give you the big bullet points. The first two rounds were invite only, and we used both a broad and targeted approach. I believe the state did the same, thinking about large organizations that have the infrastructure to provide services quickly, and also targeted approach, meaning organizations that are in community, that might be, you know, that hold expertise and proximity to a specific community, and really have a pulse on what the emergency services need to be. When we started this fund, and you know where we continue to be, is really thinking about emergency services. We're still very much in a response mode, and our third round of funding was an open competitive process and an invite-only process, focused on those services as well. And you'll see that the priority population has been for Latinx and Black communities that have been impacted by COVID-19. We've also been really intentional about supporting undocumented residents, especially because they are not eligible for relief from the CARES Act. We've also been thinking a lot about people with disabilities and survivors of domestic violence. I just want to share this map. We have you know, been using data to drive a lot of our decisions, and we have been mapping where we've been making our grant awards. And this is just to show you kind of like how we even are thinking about place and the importance of place as we continue to make grant awards. So on the left side, it's on the left side for everybody, right? We've been thinking about poverty rates and the ALICE data that the United Way tracks, which is the asset limited, income constraint, essentially the working poor. And you can see just in Cook County, you know, pretty much on the west and south sides of the city, and then also pockets in the collar counties as well. And on the right side, you know, and this data is actually, I think, a few days old. So, you know, it's changed, it's changed where we're early on. We saw that the COVID cases were impacting the Black communities. And now we're quickly seeing that it's also the Latinx communities as well. And this is just to show you when we're talking about focused populations, where we're seeing, we asked all of our grant recipients, you know, the populations that they were serving. So you'll see the denominators have changed based on the number of, with the different cycles. We were asking different questions, and as we've evolved, we've wanted not to have a big burden on asking organizations who they were serving and who they were tracking. At the same time, we thought it was really important to disaggregate that information so we can report out and make sure that we're being accountable for the grant dollars. But you'll see that the populations that we were trying to reach are in fact the organizations and the services that they're providing. So to individuals who are experiencing wage loss or job loss, also individuals and families that were experiencing instability in their housing and or homelessness, also aging adults and undocumented residents. I think there was a question in the chat. I just have another slide, so I'll just get through that.
Yeah, we can keep going on. I'll go back to those in just a minute.
Okay, thank you. So as we are proceeding, we are making sure that we're listening to our key stakeholders and using information as it arises. I think for a lot of us, it's just uncovering what we knew, right? We knew that the populations and the places that are being disproportionately impacted are the places that have been underinvested and experiencing a lot of the issues that many of us have been addressing in our work. And we're starting to, even though we're still very much in a response mode, we are thinking about, what are dotted lines in order to get to a recovery phase, and thinking about, those more kind of medium-term and long-term investments, so that with any pandemic, with any public health crisis, that our communities are going to be more, set up to be more resilient to deal with, challenges, unprecedented challenges like that we're seeing. So, and I'm happy to email this link, but this is the link, and I believe the state has one too, where we're collecting kind of real-time stories so that we don't burden our grant recipients with like a final report, that they can just report out what they're doing with the grants that they have received. And I actually go to this when I'm exhausted and feeling kind of, to just kind of be motivated to continue on. So that's it. Happy to take your questions. I don't know if we want to wait till after Geoffrey speaks.
Yeah, thank you, Anna. I think many of the questions that coming in are going to cross all of the funds and be really important to hear from all three of you about. So I want to ask Geoffrey to introduce the Arts Fund, and then we'll turn to the chat and start to answer these questions so we can learn about what's happening across all three funds.
Absolutely. Hi, everyone. Hope everyone is safe and well. It's good to see the familiar faces that I can see. I'm Geoffrey, Program Officer at the MacArthur Foundation. MacArthur has been funding the arts in the city for decades, as many of you may know. In all humility, I have to start by saying that my involvement in this effort has been limited to a portion of it that I'll talk about, but I'll just do the broad strokes in terms of what the effort's all about. It's fundamentally kind of based on the notion that the arts and culture sector has always been, essential to the health and well-being of our city and our state, but that the arts are going to be, critical in terms of helping us reconnect after the crisis subsides, and helping us to kind of make sense of our experiences and kind of bring us back together. So in early May, I've been amazed at the amount of work that others have done to bring this together so fast. And in early April, actually, the mayor and the governor announced the Arts for Illinois Relief Fund. The purpose is to provide financial assistance to artists and cultural organizations that have been impacted by the COVID-19 crisis. It's a partnership between DCASE, the city of Chicago, the state of Illinois, and the philanthropic community. The way it works is that there are three entities that coordinate the effort. Arts for Illinois is the central organizer of the effort, primarily involved in the fundraising component, overall project management. And then there's two entities, pre-existing entities, that really sort of stepped up to the challenge. One is called the Arts Work Fund, which has been around since about 2006. which traditionally supports capacity building in smaller arts organizations, and then 3 Arts, which makes grants to individual artists. And so rather than creating an entirely new structure to implement the relief, those 2 organizations stepped up: the Arts Work Fund to administer grants to arts and culture organizations, and 3 Arts to administer the grants to individual artists. To date, about $5 million has been raised. The Arts Alliance Illinois did a survey really quickly. It was really impressive, and found that arts organizations were estimated to lose more than $84 million in revenue just during the month of April due to the suspension of programs and exhibitions. So that was, impacting a range of performances and other activities. Some of the folks who are involved in this effort, there are about 30 funders who have stepped up and contributed. MacArthur is a leadership supporter, along with the Walder Foundation. I won't read the whole list, but some of you who are on the call are involved with the Field Foundation, Donnelly Foundation, Joyce Foundation, Polk Brothers, Fry, Alphawood, and many others. So I work specifically on the selection committee. Oh, first let me say what I can say about the 3 Arts piece, which is the grants for individual artists, that they received, and this changes every day, so bear with me. They received, I know, over 8,000 applications in a very short amount of time. That's a lot. And distributed 1.3 million in the first round, and is now going into a second round of grants to individual artists. The Arts Work Fund, which is the committee that I work with, let's see here. So these are grants that are general operating. Folks from across the state of Illinois are eligible to apply as an organization. Organizations that are by, for, and about people of color were strongly considered or prioritized during the first round. The majority of funds, even though it's statewide, the majority of funds are going to organizations located and serving Chicago and the Chicago area. Just a couple of statistics. I don't have a fancy presentation. I wish I did for extra credit. The Arts Work Fund received 532 applications for organizations, and reviewed them in about a month. Let's see, there were 166 organizations that were funded in the first round. Out of that 166, 40% of them are by, for, and about people of color. And when you bring that into just Chicago, that number of by, for, and about people of color goes up to 49%. And so for that figure, 34% are African American or Black-led arts and culture organizations. So 68% of the organizations that were supported, 78% of the organizations that received funds in the first round are in the city of Chicago, Chicago proper. 13% are in the Chicagoland metropolitan area, and 9% are from downstate beyond the Chicagoland area. I will say that we are going into our second round. A lot of this is available online. If folks are interested, I could send links. There's a full list of the organizations that received grants in the first round. And we have well over, several hundred organizations that we're currently reviewing for the second round. So no complaints about the call at the end of the day, because it's just about halfway through the day for me, and I'll be reviewing those grants. But you can see all the folks who came together from these different foundations to help. Oh, I'm sorry, I should have said that First Lady Pritzker and First Lady Eshelman are co-chairing the overall fundraising effort. And so we'll be doing another round and then we'll see from there in terms of the availability of funds to continue. But yes, many of our colleagues that are on this call or that we know through CAPE have been involved in the organization and review process. I'll stop there.
Thank you to all three of you for those updates on where the funds are at and for grounding us in an understanding of sort of what's available and the multiple rounds of funding that are moving forward. I'm going to skip my questions and go straight to the chat as it's starting to fill up. And I want to start with Amanda's question. I know that a few of you talked about that there are both grants to organizations and to individuals. It'd be helpful to know how those who are not documented and our individuals are able to access funds right now, particularly knowing that they may be blocked from other programs that are providing support during COVID.
I'm happy to answer that. I'm trying to think, if we had an individual who was in need of these services, my picture just got super big. Oh my word. Anyway, I would connect them with one of the, an organization that might be close to where they currently reside, and happy to talk offline. I know in addition to the Chicago Fund, there's also the Immigration Funders Collaborative, which is also housed at the Trust, that is working with the Latino Caucus and providing direct assistance as well for the same purpose. So happy to just, get lists together.
And we know that. Go ahead.
I don't know who's speaking. Oh, that also is coming up in the Illinois Fund, and I don't know how we think about people who aren't affiliated with community-based organizations, but we have made grants to a couple of interesting groups, one of which many of you probably know really well, which is the Illinois Coalition for Immigrant and Refugee Rights. So like they have expertise in figuring out how to find people differently than other traditional organizations. And so like we've relied on them. They got a grant in the first round. We also made a grant to a group called the Illinois Migrant Council, which works directly with individuals. So that those folks have direct access rather than going, we did a lot of re-granting or organizations who have funneled funds. So they have access to individuals too, but these are like groups that have, that are a little less traditional probably in their outreach. But we haven't really figured out like how folks who are not affiliated with a community-based organization can do it. And I actually think that's a good question and probably a lesson learned, because partly the challenge of doing this work in an expedient way, right? We're responsive, it's supposed to be urgent. And the best ways that we know how to do that are through networks that we already have. So that's probably a drawback, even though that's also a plus in terms of like what this work can look like.
Thank you for that. We have a question from Alex asking about sort of understanding lessons learned at this point. I know that the funds are still early in their work, but assessing progress is so important, but also hard to do right now. Do you have any lessons learned about how to go about quickly and in a way that isn't overtly burdensome to the grantees?
I mean, we were pretty mindful. We've been really careful about even like doing surveys and reaching out to organizations, just because like we know that right now organizations are responding to an emergency. So it is a hard balance. As we get further along, I'm hearing about the need for evaluations and we're trying to do what we can in-house, but it's not by any means thinking about the long-term, impacts. So
I mean, I actually think that's kind of a double, there are two sides to it. One thing about the Chicago effort that's really different from the Illinois effort is there is a lot of information in Chicago about where people live, where they are, who gets served, who doesn't. And to have all that information on the front end is actually helpful so that you can disperse more quickly and more smartly and more equitably, so that you can also, that also creates less burden on the back end for grantees who are getting the information, right? Have to send back information, because if you have enough information on the front end, you can kind of figure out that if your efforts are targeted, you're going to kind of achieve what you want. That's a really, the Illinois fund is really designed a lot off of the Chicago fund. So CCT is actually the backbone for it. The other partners are the Alliance for Illinois Community Foundations and the United Way of Illinois, but those groups have less staffing capacity than the trust does, and United Way of Metropolitan Chicago, who also helps stand up our effort. So that, in addition to not having kind of like aggregated information or like really readily available analysis at the state level in terms of like what we think about in terms of folks who are disproportionately burdened by anything that we saw pre-COVID, it makes it harder to organize. And I actually would like to see us really ask questions more for grantees so that we can see the result that is much more equitable on the Illinois fund. So I think that question can go both ways, but it really depends on the starting point. So that you don't have to ask too many questions. You can get the information out, but you can, without asking those so many burdensome questions on the back end. But none of it has been burdensome, to Anna's point. Like, I don't know what Jeff would say, but these applications are short, they're sweet. The reporting is not burdensome compared to what we do on a daily basis.
Yeah, I would just say, you know, one observation. I wouldn't quite call it a lesson yet, because we're still it's again changing every day, but just the value of having these structures in place already. So like the Arts Work Fund was already a funder collaborative focused on arts, particularly working with smaller arts organizations. There was already like this working group of arts funders that really had its finger on the pulse of the arts and culture sector in Chicago. And so it was just incredible to see how quickly it was able to shift from these capacity building grants to Gen Ops grants. And you know, the actual application process was through the trust portal, but it was an abbreviated version that really just kind of tried to get down to what are the non-recoverable expenses that have already gone out the door in terms of paying artists, and for productions that were just about to start or had already started, or exhibitions that that couldn't be recovered, and then what are the projected losses looking into April, May, etc. You know, a lot of organizations just aren't able to do their annual gala and things like that. So one observation is, like, you know, not having to create an entirely new system for managing all of the grants, and having this configuration of funders already in place, I thought made it able to respond a lot faster.
You know, I want to also mention, even though our application was designed to be really low barrier and easy to submit an application, we still heard from organizations that they just don't have the time to do that. And that as different funds were being kind of stood up, and you know, organizations were like, I don't have time. So, you know, one of the things that we were also thinking about is if organizations have already submitted an application through, you know, the Trust, Grant Central, or United Way system, could, you know, other funds and other grant-making bodies just use the applications that have already been submitted. So I know the county was interested. And we're like, we can, on the back end, have you have access to all those applications so that organizations wouldn't have to reapply.
Following that thread, it would be, I think, great for everyone to hear about how the funds are thinking about equity. So, of course, opportunities to think about equity in the application process, certainly around the communities that are prioritized for funding or the specific issues that there's an interest in funding. Would you be able to share a little bit about how the different funds are thinking about equity?
Well, number one, we're mapping, where we're making investments, and even like the first two rounds, we use both that targeted and broad approach, and we found that we were funding a lot of organizations that have downtown headquarters. And in the third round, we've done a better job of making sure that we're funding organizations that are in the communities that are disproportionately impacted by COVID-19. And then, we did ask the question, I think, in the grant agreement about if the organizations are led by a person of color.
For us, the equity conversation is really very tightly bound to how folks are experiencing COVID-19. So we're looking at it in two different dimensions, geographically and demographically. So we have maps similar to what Anna showed around the state that talks about the places where there are the most COVID cases. We have actually in rounds 1 and 2, we know that the organizations that received grants in those rounds were serving the counties with the highest number of COVID cases. In these next rounds, we're looking at the people who are disproportionately affected by COVID. So the highest priority populations that we're going to ask people to serve and really do targeted outreach to will be African Americans, Latinx, seniors, undocumented, and in the Illinois case, rural poor. So in the first couple of rounds, 46% of the grants actually did serve African Americans and Latinx populations. And I think of that 46%, 29% served African Americans. That was without us giving direction to say, we would like to see more of the funds go to these different populations. So that's kind of what the equity framework is for the Illinois Fund.
Yeah, I could speak mostly specifically to the Arts Work Fund. Again, that's only the portion of it that's making Gen Ops grants to arts organizations. The Arts Work Fund went through a whole year working with consultants around applying, an equity lens to the grant making work. So it's really, an explicit, I would say, sharp focus for the actual selection committee and the selection process. It's we're trying to apply an equity lens to the decision making as much as possible. At the moment, it's most evident in the numbers as far as who got grants in the first round. Again, about half in Chicago organizations by, for, and about people of color. People with disabilities, 4% organizations that look at that through the arts. For the LGBTQIA community, 2% of the organizations by, for, and about women, 4%. Other categories like working with veterans, people who are formerly incarcerated, about 2%. So it was an actual factor. These kinds of there were actual there were questions in the application form that were intended to yield that kind of information that the steering committee could look at in making their decisions. I think there was a chat question about announcing the results. I don't know, honestly. Internally, there's an effort to look at also distribution of grants geographically across the city on the south and west sides. I don't know as of today whether this kind of thing will be published or how it will be published. But I can say that like the full list of every organization that got a grant in the first round is available on the Artswork Fund website.
Thank you for that, Geoffrey. So the add-on question is really to understand how this is advancing the conversation about equity. Are the outcomes, the equitable outcomes, being publicized or shared so that others can learn from the approaches and outcomes of these funds?
I mean, I think I'm just going to be a little real. And that's an excellent question, right? That is a very good question about how are we doing that, whether we should be doing that. We absolutely should do that. And I will say, I mean, I know one of the questions that we were asked to think about was like, what are some of the lessons learned from like standing these funds up and executing them? Is like for the Illinois Fund, the way that we're staffed, it's all pieced together. So we're fortunate to have these folks who are working like really hard. Many of us are volunteering our time. So the people on my team know that I talk about this incessantly because I spend a lot of hours on it, but it's not my paid work for Grand Victoria Foundation. And I'm only saying that to say, and you know, we have like they might be getting some support. But really, our team is pieced together. Now, there's not anyone's job to really be paying attention to these things like on a 100% basis for their work. I'm saying that to say that like the decision for the Illinois COVID Response Fund is like, it's a really short-term fund. There isn't like a permanent kind of staff or backbone that could look at long-term things. The work of the Illinois Fund will be over in September. And then that little merry band of folks might be disbanded, right? So then how do we go about thinking about like what that is? Like it has to live on in other institutions and we have to form relationships good enough to start figuring out how to be more intentional about that. It can happen and live in the Illinois, the Alliance of Illinois Community Foundations or United Way of Illinois. So thanks for bringing that up, Janita, because we can start working on that, but we really, I can only speak for the Illinois folks. I think the people who we have working on it we're so, the charge is to be really urgent and responsive. So Anna was talking about grantees not being able to have time. That's because like the time frame that they're given is so quick to turn around the application because part of what the desire is to get the money on the street fast. And that's been like the singular focus of the funds. At least at the Illinois level. So having these other questions that are about longer term effects, you know, they come up in an ad hoc way. They're not as intentional as they could be, but they do come up.
Mm-hmm.
We probably,
yeah, I mean,
go ahead.
I was just gonna say, I don't have much to add except that, you know, so much of this is about policy and systems change work. And you know, while it is so incredible to see that these funds have been created for the short term, it would be really depressing if we didn't use this opportunity to really change system. Like if we don't get affordable housing right or advance like the needs of, you know, the importance of decarceration, I don't know. I'd be so depressed.
We probably have time for one or two more questions if people want to put them into the chat. But I think sort of in thinking about the responses that you shared to that last question, it would be helpful to understand sort of what's next for these funds. Will there be another round? How are the rounds sort of changing as you learn more about what's happening with COVID-19 and you're starting to get feedback from grantees? But sort of what's next and how are the funds evolving as we're learning more about this work?
Jeff's turn to go first.
I didn't know we were using the Socratic method. Okay, I'm ready to answer that question. We're doing our second round. The review committee is meeting next week, and then after that, there is a meeting that's literally called Next Steps, and it'll be a discussion about just what's possible. Fundraising has been going on. I don't know where that stands. It is an incredibly fantastic group. I agree with what was just said that, it'd be a shame to not continue to do something. Where the trend feels like it's going, to me, just philosophically, is that unfortunately, we may start to see some consolidation happening in the arts and culture sector, where there just may be fewer organizations overall, and some organizations that are going to look at potentially coming together in some kind of more collaborative spaces, mergers, things like that. And for me, there just aren't enough entities. There are some, but there's just not enough. There's not enough support for that work, like what to consider in a possible nonprofit merger, acquisition, who to go to for help, that kind of thing. So maybe that's one early thought about where this structure that we've brought together could potentially shift to. Real quick, in my time, there was a previous question: what are the size of the grants going to the arts organizations? It ranges from 4,000 to 30,000 per organization. We know that that's not going to solve everything, but the hope is that it's helping to, keep some of the staff in place, helping to plug some of the shortages. But that's the answer, and I will leave there.
I think for the Illinois Fund, we've had really lively discussions at the grant making working group level. They've, figuring out how to talk about equity with people who represent Southern Illinois and Metro East and the Northwest corner of the state has been a really interesting learning experience. And to Anna's point, I think it makes me think about more the role of Grand Victoria Foundation moving forward, and how it might partner to think about what these long-term effects are from how we deal with this. I think for us, for the Illinois Fund, round 5 will probably be the most interesting. One of the things that's come out of the discussions with the grant making working group is we really appreciate kind of the charge of focusing on basic needs and for focusing on response. But again, it would be a shame to not do something at least that might have some lasting impacts just beyond the life of the fund. So we'll have 5 rounds. We've just completed 3. Like I said, round 3 will be announced next week, and we're already designing and planning round 4. Round 5, it looks like that'll be a place where we'll open it up and look at different kinds of projects that will be looking more at recovery. Recovery versus response. So that was a shift that the steering committee made at the request of the grant making working group. So we'll see what that looks like in terms of building infrastructure around the state to do different kinds of outreach to different kinds of groups that we really haven't had a collective conversation around. So that could be the beginnings of thinking about what it means to be one state, and what does some of the work and activities of the fund, whether it's bringing the people together at the steering committee level or with the grant making working group, or through some of these projects that may have a little bit of a legacy, think about how we do it again the next time around, but to really look at it through the lens of the whole state.
For the next few rounds, we are thinking about, number one, we had our open round and we funded, just under 200 of the 700 applications. So what we did was we didn't reject anybody. We said that you didn't get funded for the first round, but we're going to roll it over so that for the next round, organizations that either receive funding may get another award, and or we'll look at the organizations that scored that were aligned with the fund. They just may not have risen to the top. So we'll go back to that list. we were saying as long as there's not a change in the scope, we think that we can just use those applications. We're also thinking about, given that we do know where the communities that are disproportionately impacted, might we think really specific about state, places, and say maybe we provide a certain allocation for 10 community areas. So we're just trying to see if something like that might work, and we're kind of building our case and bringing that to our steering committee to think that through.
Wonderful. Thanks for those thoughts. Since I don't see more questions in the chat, I want to go back. It looks like I've got maybe one more comment from Geoffrey, and then I will ask a final question to close this out. So Geoffrey.
Yeah, I want to say thank you, Amina Dickerson, who's on the call, for enabling me to end with a happy note, which is that there is a $100,000 match now, and the steering committee for the Arts for Illinois Relief Fund is ramping up its visibility for the opportunity to donate via the mayor's Instagram sessions on Sunday. And so, and there's also a series of ads. So that $100,000 match is fantastic. Thank you, Amina Dickerson, for informing me of that. And that's my ending on a happy note.
Well, Geoffrey, you're leading perfectly into the last question that I have for everyone. So can you let us know if there are continuing opportunities to get involved with these funds and how folks should go about doing that? And also if there is an action step that you are hoping people will take as they consider their response to COVID-19, would love to hear about that from each of you as well. Geoffrey, since you're spotlighted, I'm gonna stick with you on this one.
I keep muting myself to stop talking. Yes, I'm just going to share the link to the Arts for Illinois Relief Fund. Folks can see all the information there, who's involved, what it is. There's opportunities to donate. There's opportunities to share the information, and there's opportunities to get engaged online. So that's the best place to start with the arts work is on the website that I'll share in the chat.
Sharon or Anna?
I was just going to say, for the fund, we get the report on individual donors as well, and it's amazing to see the $5 and $10 donations. So, sharing it with your networks, as my philanthropic services staff say, with this fund, if you have more, you can do more. The United Way is not taking any money for this. The only charge is if you use a credit card, but otherwise there's no overhead. So this money is directly going to support organizations. I guess for all of us, I think it's important because we all have other work. I have another job on top of this, and I think it's important for us to be just, mindful, to be focused on some of those bigger long-term issues, and recognizing that we have to be cognizant and open to what the organizations that we support are working on and the challenges that they're facing on a daily basis. So, we provide general operating grants, and we'll continue to do that as a trust. Yeah. Stay home, stay safe, all of that sort of thing.
I think, like your first question about opportunities to engage the funds, because of the nature of them and the way that the rounds go, there's probably really limited opportunity for grantee, potential applicants to do that very much. I think we should, at least I would like to just kind of be a little frank about that. It has been hard to figure out what that looks like. So it's easier to engage with the grantees, the people who have received money, and figure out how to get their stories and kind of understand what's been happening on the ground in that way. I think in terms of what other people can do next, I think one of my biggest takeaways on this experience on the fund, which I've talked about with my team quite a bit, is that it's been really striking to me to see, I think it's a huge opportunity for us to really think about, since this is CAPE, how to have institutions and organizations that really are doing high-powered, fierce, forceful advocacy and analysis about Black people everywhere in Illinois. One of the things that we haven't seen so much is really having people advocate for equitable funds to go to that community, even though we see the data. And we haven't had that from other Black people, I would say. So that creates a huge opportunity for us to talk about that and for us to organize around how do we create these kinds of institutions that are lasting and that have that kind of like strong, fabulous ability to do the work that like the Latino Policy Forum does, and that there is an equivalent for Black people. So I would say that's a big takeaway that I would like to see more people talk about that. And then I would say, join me and other people tomorrow at 8 o'clock to talk about that very thing. So the event that CAPE is hosting with Grand Victoria Woods Fund and the Pritzker Family Foundation, and Andrea Palmer is on this call too, and she and I have had many conversations about that. That event really is a direct result of what the experience on the Illinois COVID Response Fund is. And I just think it's important to really have a clear understanding about what's happening to Black people everywhere, because we are all over in the States, and I think I would like to see to make sure that there are people who are paying attention to us in all of the corners of the state.
Thank you, Sharon, for your candor on that and for that call to action. And thank you, Geoffrey, Anna, and Sharon for joining us with these updates. Really appreciate having the opportunity to hear from the three of you and get an update on sort of what's happening and how folks can be supported through accessing the COVID-19 response funds. I want to thank everyone for joining this call tonight. And as Sharon said, we'll be back together tomorrow morning at 8 a.m. You can visit the CAPE website to get the link to that call, and I hope you will join that one as well. But thanks again so much for taking the time to be a part of this conversation. Have a great evening, everyone.